So it raises the question, doesn't it? It raises the question that people in Paul's community in Rome were asking, and the one that Paul lifted up for us in verse 1 of chapter 6 of his letter to the Romans. Well, if I'm already saved and I'm already set free from sin, why not go back to my old ways? Why not continue living in sin? You heard Paul say right there at the beginning of chapter 6, should we continue in sin in order that grace may abound? Should we continue in sin so we can show people how much God loves us and how much God has done? Shall we go back to our old ways? Well, Paul is right. He says the answer, of course, is no. In fact, Paul says we can't go back. Just as Nancy's anthem said today, I can't go back to my old ways. When I go back to my old ways, what I find myself doing is pushing myself away from God. God who reconciled me through Christ and brought me home, brought me in close to God through Jesus. And if I go back to my old ways, all I'm doing is pushing myself away from that. Pushing myself away from all the blessings that come to us when we live into the salvation that was given to us in Jesus Christ. And we find we just can't do it. That's why I call this the law of Sintrifugal Force. That wasn't a typo if you got the bulletin. Sintrifugal force is a spiritual law that's very similar to Newton's law or force of centrifugal force. You remember centrifugal force from your high school physics class, I'm sure. An object in motion along an arc or a curve experiences a force pushing it out to the edge. That's why when you go to the Indy 500 or any raceway or speedway, they have to bank the curves. Because the cars, as they go on an arc, they're pushed out to the edge by this centrifugal force. That's why when I was a little kid, when I was playing on the kitchen floor with my marbles, do you remember a bag of marbles? And marbles were going every which way. My mother said, here, Mark, here's a bundt cake pan. Why don't you put your marbles in the bundt cake pan, play with them that way, and the marbles won't go rolling under the cupboards or under her feet, wherever she was working. And I remember putting the marbles in that bundt cake can. You know, bundt cake pan, say that 3 times fast, has a little post in the middle. So you can lift the cake out of the pan. But when I put the marbles in there, I noticed if I spin the middle post, all the marbles got pushed out to the side of that pan. I didn't know it was called centrifugal force, and I didn't know anything about Sir Isaac Newton at that time. All I knew is that when you spun a thing, the objects within that thing got pushed out to the edge. That's centrifugal force. Well, spiritually speaking, I think there's something called centrifugal force. When we try to go back to our old ways, when we try to live in the old ways, when we live that life of sin, what we are doing is pushing ourselves away from the center. Just like those marbles going away from the center of that post, or those race cars, they get pushed up against the edge by that force. When we try to go back to the old ways, we're pushing ourselves away from the one who loves us, the one who reconciled us, the place of true peace. I think we drive ourselves away from light and into a place of darkness and shadow, a place of loneliness and isolation. Just because we're saved doesn't mean we can't try to fatten up our ego on some self-centered things and totally miss the stuff that's good for the soul. That's centrifugal force. It's pushing us away from God, and we push ourselves away, and we find it just doesn't work anymore. You can't go back. You can't go back to your old ways. It's a place of loneliness and isolation, a place away from God. Or as a friend of mine said recently, a friend who's in recovery, goes to Alcoholics Anonymous, look, once a cucumber becomes a dill pickle, it can't go back and become a cucumber again. It's now a dill pickle. Oh, a cucumber can become a dill pickle, but a dill pickle can't become a cucumber. If it tries to go back, it's going to be frustrated. And those who've ever struggled with addiction, you know that the mind can play tricks. It's just like it plays tricks on any sinner, making you think, I can go back to that old way. I've got things under control now, and we forget we have nothing under control. And we go back to that old way, And we find out that our lives are empty and our lives are pointless. They don't have the same joy that we had at the center with God. Centrifugal force. You just can't go back.